Hi to my fellow group members. I hope you enjoyed this video of how I made my Christmas cake. The recipe is posted in the group. Some of the things may not be exact only because I was coupling together a video, but whether you follow the recipe exactly stepwise or the video, it doesn't matter. Christmas cakes are really forgiving, so don't get wrapped up in thinking that you're going to mess anything up, especially because there's no leavening agent in them. These are Christmas cakes I did last year just to show you how they can be. I will do a decorating video once we get closer to the holidays, so you can have some ideas, and also how to make marzipan to cover your cake as well as the fondant on top of that. Enjoy the video. Here I have all of my fruit set out that I'm going to put into the Christmas cake, and I have chopped up my glaced cherries. I'm going to put dried blueberries, some, I call them craisins, but they're just dried cranberries, currants and sultanas, and I'm going to use a cherry brandy. So I'm going to start putting them into the bowl. So unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, so you don't see me putting all of the fruit into the bowl and just the cherries. Yes, this is a lot of cherries, but that's what I like. I say this again in the video, you can put whatever fruit mixture you want in it. The cherries happened to be something that needed to be chopped up as opposed to everything else that didn't have to be, so it could be put right into the bowl. And then I put in a third of the alcohol. I think I say half the alcohol at some point, but I put in just a third of the alcohol to start, just to get the hydration process going, and waited for it to absorb more before I put more alcohol in. This is me checking it and stirring it at about 45 minutes. You'll notice that there's quite a bit of pooling that is still happening. So I'm actually going to let it absorb a little bit more before I add the rest of the alcohol. So I'm going to pop a cover on and wait a little bit. I use a shower cap so I don't have to use cling film. Funny story, I asked my mom to go get me some cheap shower caps back a couple years ago, and they usually come in packages of 3, and she comes back with fancy satin-lined $3 a piece shower caps. So I got some fancy shower caps on my fruit and on my dough. Okay, it's been about 2 hours, and it looks like the alcohol has absorbed. It's only pulling a little bit, so it's ready for the rest of the alcohol to be poured in. So I'm going to do another 200 grams to equal 300 total of the cherry brandy. As for the amount you use, that's up to you. Some people use less. They use about a cup of alcohol. Some people take it and put the alcohol so it's drowning the entire mixture. I find that too much. I find the 300 grams of brandy is perfect for the 1,200 grams of fruit for this, to get nice and hydrated and ferment in a nice constant rate, and to be great for your fruit cake. Good morning, everybody. We are going to be making a Christmas cake today. However, I realized that I only had a little bit of mixed spice. I had no nutmeg, and I had very little mace, which I do use in this recipe. So I am going to mix my spices. If you've never seen mace, mace actually comes on the nutmeg. It's this papery stuff that comes off of it. Or you can just buy it, obviously dried, but I buy all of my spices whole to grind because they last considerably longer than the ground counterparts, so I kind of grind on demand. So I've started, I put some of the mace in here. I'll show you how you take it off because we can use more. It just comes off of the nutmeg. And you'll notice on the nutmeg, you can hear it, this is actually a dried out one. It shouldn't rattle like this. So if you get one like this from the get-go, don't use it. Send it back to the company and get ones that don't rattle. If they're sitting for a bit and they start to do that, that's fine. This one I kept, this is the only one that rattled. It was a very big one, so I think that the fruit just didn't fully mature inside it, but I wanted to use it for the mace. I probably won't use it for nutmeg. I also will mention that the nutmeg is inside. That's why I want to hear the rattle. Do not try to grind this. I saw reviews on Amazon about people blasting a company because the nutmeg was hard to grind and ruined their microplane. Well, it's because they were trying to grind the shell and not the actual nutmeg. You won't be getting very far because it's really hard. So I break it up a little bit. I'm going to put it into my spice grinder because it's the easiest. And I'm just going to do this. Okay. So you can see our ground up mace. Here is the recipe I used for mixed spice, but you can use whatever you want. If I got enough. Yep, I did. I'm going to use about 3/4 of a teaspoon of the mace. So I'm going to go to the coriander next, so I'm working up on my list. Because it calls for 1/3 of a teaspoon of this next 3 spices, I just do a rounded 1/4 teaspoon of the coriander. Now I'm going to do the ginger, and then now I'm going to do the cloves. Then of the allspice, I'm going to do a full teaspoon of it. And then a teaspoon of the cinnamon. It's not about getting it exact, it's more the proportion to each other, you'll notice. Also, make sure to clean your spoons in between just so you don't have residue from one spoon to the other, because that gets nasty. Now, we are going to do a teaspoon of nutmeg. So this, I'm not sure if it's going to be enough. This is the nutmeg from inside the shell, as I talked about. I'm going to wipe off my countertop again. I washed this countertop right before we started, so we have just the mace that's on it, but I'm going to grate this right onto the countertop, so I don't want to get it, you know. This is a nutmeg microplane. It's really fine, it's rounded. And it makes quick work of grating. Oh, that smells so good. Let's see how much nutmeg. I don't usually keep a lot of nutmeg on hand because it's so easy to grind on kind of on command, and it goes bad much more easily than all the spices once ground. So occasionally I'll do a little bit extra if I know that I'm going to be using it, or I'll keep just a little bit in there. So if I needed to do a pinch of nutmeg in a drink or something like that, mostly during the holiday time with, or if I overgrate, like right now I overgrated a little bit. So this I'm going to put into my mixed spice. That's it. I'm going to close my jar and I'm going to shake it up, which is why I don't fill up the jar, because then it just makes it easy. I can shake it up and it has plenty of room to do. So that is how you make mixed spice. There's plenty of recipes out there, so feel free to use the combination that you like, including pumpkin spice. If you prefer to just do it easy in the Christmas cake, that is more than fine. There's no rule that says that you can't use pumpkin spice. Hello, we are back. I cleaned up all of the spices. I have plenty of mixed spice to use. I'm gonna go over the rest of the ingredients that we need. We have our 200 grams of butter. Here in the US, it comes in sticks. I'm not sure how it is in Canada, but I know in other countries it comes in blocks, which we can get it in blocks too, but sticks is the most common thing that you'll find. We have 4 eggs, which have been sitting out to come to room temperature. We have our mixed spice, stem ginger, mixed peel, black treacle, our brown sugar or Movado sugar. This happens to be Movado, but you can use brown, no problem, and our plain flour. See if I'm missing anything else. Oh, and our salt. There we go. For our fruit, I have pre-mixed this with the alcohol. 1,200 grams of mixed fruit. You can buy whole mixed fruit spreads, bags, you know, from Amazon or from whatever grocer that you use, depending on where you are, is how common it is. And you can use that. You can cobble together your own recipe, which is what I did. I wanted mine this year to be heavy cherry because I just love cherries. If you don't have glace cherries, you can use maraschino cherries, except you want to dry them a little bit in a low oven. So then this way they can absorb the alcohol, because maraschino cherries are very hydrated and the alcohol will be minimal. So I did this about 2.5 days ago. You'll notice that, hopefully you can notice, that the alcohol is not pooling on the bottom, which is what you want. You want to make sure that it's fully absorbed, other than when I press on the fruit. I did it in 2 stages. I put in half of it. I used 300 milliliters. Half of it went in first to help kind of wake up the fruit, because some of it was drier. So it just starts the process. And then I added in the other half later on. People use different amounts. I found 300 milliliters, which may seem like a lot. Perfect for this much fruit to get fully hydrated nicely. Now you can let this sit. You can let it sit for 12 hours and use, just as long as it's fully hydrated, or you can let it ferment a bit. I don't find any difference fermentation-wise in flavor, in texture and all that between 3 days and 7 days, because I know some people leave it for a week. That's fine to do. Past a week, you really don't want to go, because then you're actually breaking down the fruit too much and you're changing the whole thing into vinegar before it gets into alcohol, and you don't want that, so don't leave it too long. Okay, we're gonna get started here. I am going to first prepare my pan. I know the easy way to go and fold up your parchment paper and then you just snip it. I don't like how it lays because I don't like the wrinkles, but that's due to my OCD. So I'm just going to take a pencil mark and go around and cut it. There's nothing wrong with the folding method at all. It's just that this takes probably more time cutting, but less time folding. I go right inside the line, simply because I don't want the pencil mark in my food, just in case. It doesn't need to be perfect, especially because I'm going to be using a springform pan, which has the little lip inside. But easy peasy, that's just 30 seconds, I think. So I'm going to take my pan. I'm actually going to use the little piece of butter that I had left from cutting it off from the stick of butter. And I'm just going to lightly grease it. You don't even need to grease the whole thing. It's simply just to help the paper stick down. So you can just stick that down into there. I'm going to do the same to the sides. Again, I don't need to get it as if I was flouring the pan, because this is just using it as a sticky I got this Reynolds parchment paper, which I usually use, the non-bleach type, but because of all the shortages, I didn't have it. Okay, so it's fine. I'm going to cut this down because I don't need it as tall as that. I do a collar simply because it gives the edge that I want while it's baking. So we're just going to stick it in there. And I went a little bit too enthusiastic on the paper, which I will save these scraps for something else because I don't like to waste anything. Parchment paper, most of it, if it's good quality, can be used up to 3 times. So that's probably a little bit too tall, so I'll probably trim that even more. But you can put it up that tall and then just fold it over rather than making a circle for the top. So I'm going to take this and set it aside for now. I'm also going to preheat my oven. Okay, I'm putting it on convection bake or a fan oven, depending on where you live is what it's called.
Okay, so I was going to get started right now, but my cat kept getting in the way. So I'm going to let you hear that for a second and then get back to it.
I'm going to hurt my cat by accident because she keeps wanting to play, bringing me her toys at my feet. Cat, no. Oh, go away. Go away. Okay, because my cat keeps bothering my feet, I realized that I must have hit the button going by and I missed a whole bunch of things. Well, you missed a whole bunch of things. So I have to kind of recreate it. What I did is I took out 50 grams of stem ginger from my jar. I make it myself and I chopped it up. On the recipe, I wrote 100 grams. You don't need 100 grams. I realized that I made a typo as I was transcribing it. I only used 50 grams. You can certainly use 100 grams if you really like a more gingery cake, but I didn't want it to overtake the dried fruit. So I'm going to set that aside. I also took out a tablespoon of the ginger syrup with it, because that's going to go, which is 15 milliliters. The other thing that I think that I missed, which I'll edit this out if I didn't, is I put in 100 grams of mixed peel.
You'll notice I don't put the mixed peel in with the rest of the fruit to ferment in the alcohol for the few days. That's because I don't like what the alcohol does to the mixed peel. It can make it bitter and you lose all of those nice citrus notes for your cake. So I put it in the day that I am baking into the fruit mixture for an hour or two so it can get nice and hydrated, but it doesn't actually ferment. This way you have a really nice, smooth, citrusy, noted flavor to your cake, and you'll be a lot more happy. Okay, now for the flour. I measured out 300 grams of flour. That may seem like not a lot of flour, but Christmas cakes actually don't need a lot of flour. Many recipes actually have less. After I measured out the 300 grams, I measure in 2 teaspoons of the mixed spice. You can use a teaspoon only if you want it a little bit less spicy of a cake. And also a half a teaspoon of kosher salt. If you're using sea salt or table salt, make sure to reduce that to a quarter of a teaspoon. I also use my dough whisk. It is the number one thing that I use in my kitchen because you can use it for so many different things. You want to make sure when you get the dough whisk that it actually has separation between the tines. I see so many that are completely flat when you get it, which that really isn't doing you any good. So make sure there's separation. The original Danish dough whisk I find is the best. I'm actually waiting on a new one because my handle finally broke from my era, not theirs. Okay, here I have my 4 eggs that are sweating because they're coming up to room temperature. I know it can get some frustrating sometimes because people forget to take them out of the refrigerator, but it really does help, and there are tricks to warm them up.
So we have some butter here. In America, we have sticks. So, oops, that went off. I'm just gonna have butter. 213. That's exactly what it should be. But we need, 113. So we need 200 grams of butter. $90. Oh. All right, I'm gonna leave that 1 gram because that really doesn't make that much of a difference.
So here I've taken out my digital kitchen scale, and I'm going to weigh out my Movado sugar. You can use dark brown sugar. It really is not going to make much of a difference in this recipe. Because of the addition of the treacle, you're going to lose the flavor complexities that the Movado sugar is going to give. So don't let that hold you up. It's just going to depend on what area you're in as to what is more readily available. So we're going to measure out 200 grams of the brown sugar or Movado sugar.
Grams. There we go. We have our butter, which we are going to put in. Put our sugar into there. I'm using a KitchenAid mixer today, simply because I think that's mostly the stand mixer that most people have. So I brought it out for this, and plus you can see inside because my Kenwood does not, you can't see inside, but you can certainly use it. You want to use a paddle attachment for this, and you want to start it off low. So this is just on the stir for the KitchenAid, the stir setting, which is equal to 1. Okay, once you see that sugar pick up, you're going to move it on up to a 4 in the KitchenAid, so about a medium setting. And you want to let this go for 2 to 3 minutes to get nice and aerated.
You really don't want your butter to be too soft because you want the nice cold butter with the nice hard sugar to be able to cut through it at a rapid rate so it makes nice little air pockets to give a little bit more open crumb to your baked good, especially in a holiday cake.
Okay, so I did that for 2 minutes simply because the butter was so soft. I didn't want to melt it any further. I put this paddle in because that's what most people have. I also have a paddle attachment that has a spatula on it, which is normally what I would use. But now I'm just spatulaing it off the sides. Sorry, you probably can't see. Just so it makes it easier for the eggs to get mixed into.
Now I'm going to put in my room temperature eggs. Can you use cold ones from the fridge? Absolutely. It's just that the room temperature eggs are going to give you a better product in the end.
So then you're going to take 1 egg at a time, and you can crack them right in and let them mix. And I'm putting my thing into my handy dandy compost bin, but rinsing them first. Once that's done, oops, these are fresh eggs from the farm. So the shells are very delicate. And next, so I didn't need to put any flour into it because it is a perfect consistency, if you see in there, of my, okay, so I do things a little bit differently than most, just for this Christmas cake, as far as what I put in. I'm now going to put in my other sugars. You could put these actually in before the eggs, but you could do before or after. I can't remember what I wrote in there. So that is the ginger syrup. And then, now, one thing that I do to my measuring spoon if I'm using molasses or treacle is I just take a little bit of butter and put it in there. Why? To help it get out of the measuring spoon. Unless it's a recipe where you can't use a fat in it, it's fine, but there's butter already in this recipe.
This recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of the treacle. However, if you want a lighter cake, you can put 1 tablespoon or you can leave it out altogether. That's up to you. I think I'm actually going to reduce mine in this recipe as it is.
I'm actually going to probably do 1.5, to be honest. Yep. So it doesn't get too dark. But people like different things, and I wanted to make sure that the recipe could be used for anything. It's, as I said, very forgiving. So see, that came out easily. And then wipe off the treacle bottom. Okay, give that a little stir. Okay, now this is where I'm a little bit different than most. Most people go and fold in their flour right now, which is fine to do. However, I prefer to put my fruit in first. This is just in this fruit cake, simply because it gets the fruit nice and colored with the butter mixture. And don't worry about the extras in there because I'm going to put this into that bowl in a second. So I just like to mix this around. Probably should just put it right back in the bowl to begin with. Smell that alcohol, boys. Mix this up. Anyway, I don't want you to think that this is a boozy cake, because it's actually not. This you can be a little bit harder handed on, by the way. It's really not a boozy cake at all. I thought when I had first made one, I was like, great, this is going to be a bunch of alcohol, kind of like a rum cake would be. Even after feeding it for weeks and weeks and weeks, it was not at all, which was great. Then I'm going to put in my stem ginger. Probably should be reading my actual recipe to make sure that I'm doing it in the order that I described. But you'll be fine either way.
The reason I do it in this reverse way is simply so I don't have to beat up the gluten when trying to mix in all the fruit. It's just easier.
Okay, now I'm going to pour in my flour mixture. I'm going to put half in first. And I say fold, but with the dough whisk, you really don't, it folds it kind of automatically. You're just trying to get the flour hydrated. You don't want to beat this too much because you don't want to build the gluten up. The good thing is that there's no water other than the water that's in the butter, so that helps not allow the flour to, it's binding to fats rather than water. So it will build gluten once kind of it gets exposed to the water of the butter, but you have some time. So that's all it takes is that, you know, handful of stirs before it's done. Okay, we are now going to pour the cake into the prepared tin that we did before. And I'm too short for this. I'm standing on my tippy toes. So just let it kind of plop in there. Other flavors that people may put in here, obviously the almond, you can, to pair with that, you can put some almond extract. An almond brandy would actually, kind of an almond liqueur, brandy would actually be lovely if you can eat nuts, that is. I can eat almond extract because the almond protein isn't actually in the extract. So I'm glad that I can because I love almond flavor. So you're going to take this. If you see any spots from the bottom, you can kind of mix it in, but you're going to put it into the pan. By the way, this is an 8-inch think is a 20 centimeter spring form pan. That I have. You can, if you want a, I have a 9-inch, which makes a short, slightly shorter cake. That's fine to do. I wanted a nice tall one. So, according to what pan you use, is how long it's going to take to bake. So, have that. But it's going to take 3.5 to 4 hours. If you're using the convection, it could take a little bit less or more onto the 3.5 hour side. The other thing that you want to do is you want to cover the top of the cake. Okay, you can cut a circle. I'm using the scraps from what I had before, so I don't waste anything. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle, so. There's that. I'll cut one more. Just to make sure that the top is covered. This is going to help it not dry out while it's baking. This is going to help it not brown the top. Some people right towards the end will take it off just so the top can brown a little bit, but it kind of also helps it kind of steam it because it holds the moisture in as opposed to just a straight baking of it. So I'm going to change my camera around so you can see the oven, and we'll go from there.
I'm setting this into the oven, and then I'm going to set the timer for 3.5 hours and check it at that time to see how it is going.
Okay, I took off the paper. This is 3.5 hours. I'm going to leave it in here for another 20 minutes or so. It still has some give to it, and I want to dry it out a little more. So back in it goes, and I'll try again in 20 minutes.
Okay, here is the cake out of the oven. The springiness feels a lot better. We already know that it is coming out clean because I've done the tester before. This is at 4 hours. It looks great. It smells incredible. I'm going to let this cool for a little bit before opening up the spring form and unpeeling the paper. And that's about it. Here is the cake completely cooled. As it's sitting on the drying rack, I am leaving it to completely cool for many hours before I wrap it. Before I wrap it, I'm going to take a skewer and I'm going to poke it many times over the top of the cake. This is to help the alcohol kind of tunnel through. The first alcohol that you're going to put on is just going to kind of break the layer, but it's going to stay nice and moist so it can get further and further into the cake. I'm then going to flip it upside down and just poke a handful in the bottom because you don't want to do too many where then you're completely breaking apart the entire cake. Then I'm just going to brush a little bit of the alcohol on the bottom just to get it a little bit moistened. I don't want to put too much there to start. Sometimes I wait several days to do this, but the cake was dry enough for me to do it right from the beginning. Then I'm going to take the rest of the alcohol. It was about 2 teaspoons total. And then I'm going to dab it onto the cake. Remember those skewer marks, so dabbing it down so it can go into the cake. It's going to be wet at the beginning, but as you go, it's going to seep into the cake over the course of the week. So it's okay that it's nice and wet. I am going to start to brush a little bit on the sides of the cake, just so it gets very well-rounded as we go. And I'm probably going to pour the last little bit on top just to finish it up. And here we go. We are just putting the last little bit on, and we are going to be ready to wrap it up. We are going to put 2 layers of parchment paper around it, and then I'm going to show you how to wrap it in aluminum foil or aluminium foil, simply because if you don't have a tin big enough, I'm going to actually put this in the tin, so I'm going to undo the wrappings most likely. But that's it. Just get it nice and tight and then store it in a cool, dry place.